Hi, welcome to Talking Books and Stuff, the program that talks all about books and writing and stuff. Here's your host, Dennis Rimmer.
All right, here we go. The tape is rolling. It's a snowy day here in Radisson, Saskatchewan. On the line with us from a bit further north, we have John Brady McDonald. He's a writer, artist, historian, musician, playwright, actor, activist, born and raised in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. He's the author of several books. His written works have been published and presented around the globe. He's also an acclaimed public speaker and a noted polymath. Other than that, have I missed anything, John?
No, I think that just about covers it all.
How do you find time to do all this stuff?
I don't sleep.
Well, I noticed that the other day you had something posted about, you had a chance to sleep in, and then at 5:30 you were wide awake.
Yeah. Apparently there's a group of us. If you get more than 4.5 hours sleep, you could function on 4 hours sleep or less. Apparently, we're called the sleepless elite, and wow. I'm one of those guys. Due to the life I've lived, my internal body clock is all messed up, and if I sleep more than 5 hours a day, I feel hungover usually. So I was thinking, it had been a busy week, and I thought, you know what, I'm actually going to try sleep in, and turn my alarms off. It was a day off of work, and 5:30 in the morning, I sat bolt upright in bed, and I was awake.
And that was it. You were off to the races. We're talking with John today because of a new book he has out. We talked to him a while back. You've heard that interview. Now we've got a new one here. And the book is Carrying It Forward. And I'm not going to try to pronounce the full word. Can you give us a full title, please?
Yeah, the title of the book is Carrying It Forward, Essays from Kistahpinânihk.
Kistahpinânihk.
Yes.
And what is that?
Kistahpinânihk is the traditional Nihilak Plains Cree term for the area where Prince Albert, Saskatchewan sits. For thousands of years, this was the gathering place, and that's what Kistahpinânihk means in Cree is the gathering place, the meeting place. This was the traditional wintering territory for the Plains Cree people, my ancestors, in this area. So for thousands of years, long before James Nisbet sailed his canoe up these waters, our people were here, and this was our wintering place. This is where we gathered to live during the wintertime.
And Carrying It Forward is a series of essays. So what inspired this collection? Because the last time we talked, you had a poetry book out. Now this is essays. How'd that come about?
It actually came about through a request from Noel Allen, who's the publisher at Woolsack and Wynne, the people who publish the book. I had submitted a poetry manuscript to Woolsack and Wynne. They had they said no to the poetry book, but Noel Allen said, have you ever considered writing nonfiction? Noel, she was a follower of mine on social media, and on social media, I've spent a lot of time, particularly in the past couple of years, writing longer, I don't want to call them rants, but longer, protracted Facebook posts dealing with the issues that we as Indigenous people are facing in today's society, in 21st century society. And she read those works, and she said, what you're writing on Facebook, would you ever consider expanding on those and turning them into an essay format and turning them into essays and into a nonfiction book? And I had never considered it, but said, sure, I'd love to. And so from there, it turned into this amazing book that came out in November.
And how long from the, just for the curious among us, how long from start to finish, from the time the idea was suggested to you until you had a copy in your hand, how long was that, more or less?
It was probably a good 1.5 to 2 years. It was during COVID, so it was during the I don't want to call it the downtime, but it was during the period of COVID mostly that the book started to take shape and start to get fleshed out.
So it's not an overnight process like a lot of people might think. If you're going to be a writer,
No.
I'll sit down today and tomorrow I'll have 900 pages that will be a bestseller. It doesn't quite work that way.
If it did, oh man, it would have made life so much easier. not just for this book. It's when you're writing something, and particularly when you're writing nonfiction, you're writing something that's very meaningful. You're putting a lot of time into it. You're putting a lot of effort into it. You can't just cavalierly throw your words out there without thinking of how is this going to affect people when they read it. You have to consider your reader. You have to consider your audience, and you have to consider the craft, the words you're creating, what you're trying to say. Why are you trying to say it? It's just With a lot of work that you could just, slapdash up with fiction, you can go, I know people that can knock off a couple pages of fiction a day when they're writing, but when it comes to, when you're dealing with very sensitive subject matter, you have to be respectful and mindful of that. You have to be respectful and mindful of what you're saying and how you're saying it. And I'm very grateful that Noelle Allen and Wolfsack Wind gave me that opportunity, because it was something that was completely, aside from, like I said, the Facebook posts, a lot of it was out of my comfort zone. Being a poet, you can hide behind turns of phrases and the spangles and jangles and training wheels that we have in poetry. This didn't have that. It was this book doesn't have all of the spangles that you can hide behind. So it forced me to really reconsider how I was writing and what I was trying to say, and I love that. I deeply love doing that.
And it's carrying it forward by John Brady McDonald. Now, a while back, John, you had a different middle initial, and now you don't. Can you give us a rundown of that story?
Sure, I can. I'm a residential school survivor. I was in the Prince Albert Indian student residence from 1984 to 1989, so I'm among the last generation of residential school survivors. When I was born, my birth name was actually John A. McDonald. I was named after my father, who was John B. McDonald. For some reason, he named me John A. McDonald. And for a lot of people who only see John A. McDonald as the first prime minister, the guy who was on the $10 bill, John A. McDonald was the creator of the residential school system. This was an individual who began the process of the attempted eradication of my people, the cultural genocide that we suffered. And so for 40 years, I carried that name. And I tried my very best to do with what I could. What I was finding, though, is when I was speaking out and advocating for residential school survivors and against racism, against intolerance, people thought that I was being facetious or being silly, or that I'd made this up. That, I was pardon the language, I was being a smartass by saying my name was John A. McDonald. And it was tough. It was it was an albatross across my neck, or on my neck, for years, my entire life. A few years ago, the government of Saskatchewan created legislation that allowed residential school survivors to change their names for free, without fee. I contacted the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation and spoke to a wonderful man named Eugene Arcand. Beautiful human being. I love this man very deeply. He's a residential school survivor. He's with the Saskatoon Survivors Circle. He's an advocate for residential school survivors. He actually went to residential school with my father at the same residential school at the same time. Okay. And so I approached him. I contacted him. I said, and I told him my story. This is my name. This is who my dad was. This is what I went, do you think I qualify enough to change? And he says, yes, absolutely. Let's get this done. And so when I went through the process of going what my name was going to be, it was a no-brainer. My grandfather was Métis leader Jim Brady, one of the most influential Métis leaders of the 20th century. And in many Indigenous circles and communities, he's held up there in the same regard as Louis Riel and Gabriel Dumont as one of the major leaders of the Métis people. And that's my mother's father. I wanted to ensure that tradition, that heritage, that lineage gets carried forward and honored. And so I changed my name to John Brady McDonald. And if I'm not mistaken, I think I'm the first residential school survivor in Saskatchewan to have actually gone through the process of doing the name change. So I'm very honored by that and very humbled, and it's an amazing feeling. It feels like 40 years of weight taken off my back, and it was a wonderful experience.
That's what I was going to ask. Was it a relief, to say the least? And would the word closure apply here?
I don't think that when you're a survivor of anything traumatic, there's ever a full sense of closure.
Right.
There's a healing. There's the beginning of the healing of the wounds, but as any survivor of trauma will tell you, those wounds never get fully healed. You just kind of spend your life changing the dressings, and so this was one changing of the dressings, to changing of the bandages of that particular wound. So it did. I have a name I'm proud of. I can feel myself walking a little taller, and when I hear my name being spoken, when I see it written, I got a smile on my face. I never used to have that when I signed my name for anything.
And I know what you mean, because I use that term closure, but I don't know anyone who actually likes that term, who's gone through anything. I think the media or keeps asking it, or people throw it out there as if it's going to change everything overnight. I don't think that's how it works. We're talking with John Brady McDonald. A book is Carrying It Forward, essays from... Okay, I'm sorry, I can't read the word properly. Essays from where?
Kistahpinânihk.
Kistahpinânihk. And earlier in the book, you talk about an encounter with Margaret Atwood about the time that you thought you were on your way. Didn't quite turn out that way, huh?
No, it was that was an interesting experience. In 2004, I had released my first collection of poetry. And I was a young man. I was probably in my late teens, early 20s when it came out. And I thought that this was going to be my ticket into the big time. I was going to be this poet, and I was going to get to live off my words, as it were. And for a while there, I had my 15 minutes of fame in the sun. The book afforded me the opportunity to speak at the Ottawa International Writers Festival, the Edmonton and Fort McMurray Literary Festival, and the Eden Mills Writers Festival. And there I got to share the stage with some amazing, all of them, I got to share the stage with some amazing talents. But at Eden Mills, which is held in Guelph, Ontario, I got to share stage with Drew Hayden Taylor, the late Lee Miracle, and many amazing authors. And Margaret Atwood was was another author that was doing a reading at the time. And as I was coming, you're doing the schmoozing thing, as it were, on the streets after, because they have a book fair, and people are kind of wandering in and out of bookstores and et cetera. And as I'm walking by, I see this lady in a floppy hat and a green dress come along, and she comes in and says, "I just want to introduce myself. I want just say how much I appreciate your work," and I was kind of starstruck, and I'm honored, I said. And like I say in the book, the picture's hilarious, because there's Margaret Atwood, the epitome of the cultured, she's in the nice flowers, the nice summer hat, and the green dress, and looking every bit the Canadian author. And here's my scrubby butt with a long, my goatee dyed red. I'm in an old army jacket. I've got a pentagram around my neck. We've got a T-shirt from a tattoo shop. So it was an interesting experience, but it was very cool to have someone like Margaret Atwood come up and say they appreciated my work.
I would be quaking in my boots if I went up to Margaret Atwood and she came and introduced herself to you. So yeah, that would have been a starstruck experience, to say the least. But then, as you said, 15 minutes of fame, and then you had to get down to the real work of being a writer. Is that right?
Yeah, I went after the glory and the shine kind of went off of my book. It was almost 20 years in the wilderness, writing and submitting to publishers. I ended up accruing nearly 300 rejection letters in 20 years. A lot of times where I'd submit manuscripts for my poetry books. I get a stack of I'd get the rejection letters back, and a lot of them were, "We love your work, but it doesn't fit into our marketing scheme." A lot of times it was "Dear blank," and they would pencil my name in, so I was getting generic rejection letters.
Right.
There was one time where I was close to getting a publishing deal signed, and they had wanted me at the last minute can you get your book translated into Cree? I said, well, I could try. And I mentioned this in the book. I tried to get my poetry translated into Cree. It didn't work out. And as a result, they pulled the offer. And that's when it dawned on me. It wasn't the work they were wanting. It was just they wanted a book published in Cree. And I could have wrote anything. I could have wrote a cookbook,
right,
or the phone book, and as long as it published in Cree, they were going to publish it. So it was kind of that was a very painful experience for me. I've had situations where I've sent books in to get published, and they're bound in paper. The manuscripts were returned to me unread. It was still in the paper that I'd wrapped it up in. So, and wow. It was 20 years. It was a 20 years of trauma. It was another form of trauma, of rejection. And there were many times where I wanted to give up. I wanted to quit. I wanted to basically just pack it in and say, what am I doing this for? I've got all these words that are sitting on my computer that aren't being read. What's the point? And then in 2020, the year the world kind of hit the brakes, there was this glimmer of light. And within 18 months, I had 3 of my books published. Within 2 years, I had 4 books published. And it was to go from 20 years of nothing to all of a sudden, bang, 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 and having my books being reviewed by some of the biggest names in the Indigenous literary community, having my books nominated for the Saskatchewan Book of the Year Award, being nominated for the High Plains book, being shortlisted for the Saskatchewan Book of the Year, being a finalist for the High Plains Book Award. It was amazing. And it was just me not giving up, that resilience of not giving up on my dream. And it was very powerful for me.
So not to make light of it, but it's like a 20-year overnight success. So people don't understand. Every once in a while, something. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm cautiously going into it just because the last time in 2004 I thought, oh, right on, this is I've got it made. Now I've been humbled.
Yeah,
and that's one thing that in traditional Indigenous culture you learn humility. And back then in 2003, 2004, I was this brash 19-year-old kid, 20-year-old kid that was being kind of touted as this wonderkind, the next new thing. And I fully admit I let it go to my head. Now, with age and with being humbled like that and learning humility, I'm grateful for it now. But I'm not thinking too far ahead. I'm enjoying what I've got now and appreciative of it, and continuing that journey that way.
And more or less on that same line, but you posted something I saw on social media just the other day about, if I can paraphrase it, about someone says, how can you be Indigenous or Métis if you look so white? And you had a good answer to it, which traces your lineage. So can you pull that out of your brain again for us?
Sure. I'm very fortunate in that my family has been at the forefront of Métis and Indigenous history in this country for a long time. I am the great-great-great-grandson of Chief Mistawasis, the first chief to sign Treaty 6. My great-great-grandfather, Laurent Garneau, fought alongside Louis Riel in the 1869 rebellion and was a spy during the 1885 rebellion. I mentioned my grandfather, Jim Brady, one of the greatest Métis political leaders of all time. My great-grandmother was the first Métis registered nurse in Alberta. So I come from this very strong lineage, and I'm often, as a light-skinned Indigenous person, I'm often asked, well, you look so white.
Yeah.
Well, my great-grandfather James Patrick Brady Sr. was born in Ireland. He was an Irishman. He came from, he wasn't, they were on the lower end of the aristocracy. They were, like I mentioned, they're almost bordering on petty bourgeois. They came from the educated higher working class. They were engineers, doctors, lawyers. One of my ancestors was the mayor of a town in Ireland, and he came from this background. Studied to be a barrister, didn't go through with it. He never took the bar exam. Ended up coming to Canada in the late 1800s to become a Dominion land agent, and came west and went to St. Paul de Métis, what was called at the time St. Paul de Métis in Alberta, which is a couple hours north of Edmonton.
Yep.
And there fell in love with my great grandmother, who was Métis. And he was a man who gave never, from the research I could gather, because he passed away in 1948, never went back to his family, never asked for money. He fell in love and he stayed in a Métis community. And it wasn't, I mentioned in that post about how it wasn't a country marriage. And this was something that happened quite often where the English, the French, the Scottish, the Irish males who'd come over during the fur trade would what is quote unquote country marry Indigenous women, and actually were country marrying Indigenous girls. Another great grandfather of mine actually country married my great grandmother when she was 11. So it was a rather disturbing process, where these older males, white males, would take possession, as it were, of Indigenous women, and they fulfilled the roles of wife and mother, and were often used as a bridge during the fur trade. With this situation, it wasn't like that. This was a situation where he actually married my grandmother, who was a year older than him. They were in love, and they were married for, I think it was just about 18 years until she passed away. I'm assuming of Spanish flu, because she had died in 1918, and It was the height of the Spanish influenza. And some of the, reading some of it, reading some of the transcripts and some of the documentations, they actually had a hard time bearing her because there was like 30 people who had died that day. So I'm making that assumption that it was the Spanish flu, and it devastated him.
Wow. Sorry. Yep. Carry on.
Go ahead.
Yep. I was just saying,
okay.
Wow.
So
what a story.
He left what could have been a very comfortable existence to come to Canada, to come to a Métis community and share in the struggles and the hardships of the Métis. And they had 8 children, and was from all accounts was a very wonderful man. And one thing I always acknowledge is, when I acknowledge my ancestors, I don't pick and choose which ancestors I acknowledge. I acknowledge my Cree ancestors as much as I acknowledge my Irish ones, as much as I acknowledge the French ones, the Orcadian Scots ancestry. Those are, all that DNA, within my 23 chromosomes.
Yep.
It is those building blocks, those people who helped make me who I am today. And I have to acknowledge that. And honor that.
And what you are today is award-winning historian, artist, playwright, musician, actor, activist, John Brady McDonald. Book is carrying it forward. There's a chapter in there, it's called The West Flat, and I think a portion of it, someone says, how long do we have to keep on apologizing? And you have a very good trenchant answer to that. Is there a couple of those points you can pass on?
Yes, that conversation started was when you see Indigenous issues online or in the news media, if you're a brave person or a masochistic person, you look at the comments, and they're often brutal and racist and hateful and spiteful, and it's absolute garbage to read. but it's a good pulse. A lot of people say, "Oh, it's just a few of them." No, that's a pretty good slice of what Indigenous relations is in this country. Is in the comment sections, because there's not there's the fact that they're being allowed to be said, and the fact that there's nobody really stepping up outside of Indigenous. We have a few allies that will step up and speak, but the fact that there are so many negative comments towards Indigenous people in these comment sections, it gives you a pretty good slice of what reconciliation looks like right now. And the one thing I've always said is, when people talk about reconciling, and when you hear apologies from Canada, from Canadians, from politicians, I've always likened it to a petulant child kind of going, "Okay, I'm sorry. Can I go now?"
Yeah. Okay, can I have my cookie? Yep.
And so it oftentimes, Indigenous people, we get asked, "Well, how long do we have to keep apologizing?" And that's what you see in those comments. How long do we have to keep paying for this? How long? And my comment, you think about, okay, well, when these comments on social media aren't loaded with negativity and haha emojis and people making fun of Indigenous people, when Indigenous people don't make up the majority of people in incarceration, when First Nations communities have access to drinking water, clean drinking water, when our women, our sisters, our daughters, our mothers, our aunties don't have to, or don't disappear anymore, when missing and murdered Indigenous women stop disappearing. When these things start to happen, then you can stop apologizing. Basically, when the thing you're apologizing for stops happening is when people can stop apologizing.
And with
that's how I phrase it.
That's a good way to phrase it. And you don't take on, you're not a spokesperson for everybody of Indigenous Métis heritage. You're just yourself putting out these messages, right?
Right. I've never claimed to speak for anybody but myself, but I will be there to advocate for those who are either don't feel their voice can be heard, aren't ready to speak for themselves, or in the cases of missing and murdered Indigenous women who aren't here anymore to tell their stories, and to make sure that their stories are not forgotten. And what I often say is, if your idea of reconciliation doesn't take into consideration the homeless people, doesn't take into consideration the girls on the street, doesn't take into consideration the young men in gangs, doesn't take into consideration the addicts. If your idea of reconciliation doesn't include those people, then it's not reconciliation, because each one of those individuals is a victim of colonization, is a victim of the racism and cultural genocide that took place in this country, and it in many cases continues to take place in this country.
Exactly. And with that, we should leave it. The book is Carrying It Forward, Essays from Kistahpinânihk. Oh, I'm sorry, I blew it. Can you give the title again, please? I don't want to be insulting, but I just can't get my tongue around those words.
Kistahpinânihk.
Kistahpinânihk.
Yeah.
Close enough. Carrying It Forward from Woolsack and Wind. Oh, one quick one. The artwork on the cover, you have a red hand. Is the major thing. What is specifically, it looks red to me. What's the idea behind that?
The artwork in that piece actually comes from a larger piece that I designed for to be a gallery exhibition. It's the centerpiece of a multi-canvas display of various little, almost puzzle piece looking vignettes of different shapes, different colors, but they're all kind of tied around this central endpoint. When I created it, it was had the double meaning of reaching out for pieces to pull them back in, but at the same time trying to grab whatever's drifting out. So that for me, that's what the painting symbolizes, is this, at the reaching out to collect, to bring in, but at the same time trying to reach to grab what's drifting out. And that's where the painting behind it. And it was something that I painted during the the lockdown. And so it was a piece that hopefully one day we'll be able to find a gallery home for. But right now it's living in my studio. But that's what the symbolism is for me, for the painting. And when they were designing the cover of the book, the art department at Woolsack and we looked at that and said, hey, we really like that. Can we use that?
And that is Carrying It Forward, Essays from Kistahpinânihk, and it's by John Brady McDonald, Woolsack and Wynne. John, we'll let you get back to your busy day. I'm sure you have nothing to do for the rest of the day, so we'll let you go back to your couch and have a nap.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you for visiting with us today. This is Talking Books and Stuff with Dennis Rimmer. Contact him at dennis@talkingbooks.tk. Thank you, and may all the good news be yours. Oh, and don't forget to check out his book, The Great Canadian Notebook, available across Canada and at amazon.ca.